Today, I want to talk about some videos that changed my life, changed the way I think. And this is not so much about the biographical part of the story. This is more about what we can learn from these videos and how we can improve our communication skills. We're all activists, we're students of objectivism, so learning how to connect with people's minds and take them from where they are to where we want them to be is something useful. So the first video, I'm not even sure if I'm gonna have time to get to the other two, but the first one is the most important. So here's the context. The context is that I came across this video in 2008. At that point, I was at the peak of my nihilism. I was at the peak of my anti-capitalistic nihilism. So I was at the point where I said that theory doesn't matter anymore. Marxism, Leninism didn't work. What we need is action. What we need is to stop this greedy capitalist in any possible way. So back then, I was doing, God knows why, a master in environmental law. It's a long story how I found myself there and how from there I found myself in academia. And in one of the modules, we were dealing with something about environmental regulations. So at that point, again, I had such hatred for for industry, for anything that had to do with capitalism, that I was endorsing even radical environmentalism. I was even endorsing eco-terrorism. And I remember how and why I endorsed it. There was one essay that said something like, it was like a case, a scenario. There is this development project in this particular neighborhood. How could you stop it? And I said one possible choice would be injunction. Another possible choice would be, I don't know, something like European directive. And another possible solution would be to set a camp there or do eco-sabotage like Earth First. So this is the type of person I was back then. What a loser. Anyway, so we are either at, I think we're December 2008, around that time. So my then lecturer and seminar leader in one of the environmental law classes, he projects a clip on class, and he wanted to see our reaction. That clip was a video by Bjorn Lomborg. Lomborg was famous at that time for his book, The Skeptical Environmentalist. So this book was a TED Talk by Bjorn Lomborg, a TED Talk from 2005. And back then, TED Talks were like a big thing. And the title was Global Priorities Bigger Than Climate Change. Already when I see the title, I'm triggered. I'm like, oh, okay, there's a hired gun of big business. So Bjorn Lomborg starts his TEDx talk and he says, look, I'm going to give you a list of global problems. He tells to the audience, I'm giving you a list of global problems. It included HIV, malaria, climate change, poverty, corruption, things like that, malnutrition. So the 10 biggest, let's say, global problems. And he tells the audience, I want you to write down from the most important to the least important, which we should solve first. So he gives this as a test to the audience. And then he says, let me guess what you did. He tells the audience, you thought, what is the most important problem? This is the one we need to tackle first. But he says, you are missing an important point. This way of thinking what is the most important problem is not necessarily the most effective way of thinking. Because at the end of the day, the most important problem is we all die, but we cannot do anything about this. So Bjorn Lomborg said, instead of focusing on the problems, how about we focus on the solutions? So don't prioritize problems, prioritize solutions. So he says we need to prioritize based on how much would it cost to solve this problem. Already there, I was triggered, of course, the neoliberal only cares about money. How much would it cost to solve it? And also, how efficacious would be the solution? How effective would the solution be? Otherwise, he said, it's like we go to a restaurant, we have a menu in front of us, but we don't know the prices. And we don't know the size of the portions. So is this a pizza like 1 piece or 80 pieces? And it costs 1,000 or 100,000? So we need, he says, to put some marks, put a price on the problem to see how much it would cost and whether the solution would be efficacious. So in order to see which problems we should solve, He gathered a team of some of the best experts in each area, in area of malaria, in area of climate change, in area of immigration and things like that. And they put a price tag and an estimation on whether the solution could be efficacious. So they asked 3 questions for each problem. What can we do? What will be the cost? And what will be the benefit? Now, most in the audience, as you can guess, answered that the most important problem with which we should deal first was climate change. This was 2008, but it was already a big deal. And of course, we in the class were doing this in real time. We all had climate change as our answer. And then Bjorn Lomborg says, I've got news for you. Climate change is the least effective of these projects that we should tackle. Put differently, of all these problems that you see, the 10 big problems, climate change is the least one we should tackle. Already I was triggered. I was like, how? Of course. This capitalist guy, obviously he's paid by big business. And he says, here's why. Because for climate change, what we can do is very, very, very little, and it comes at a huge cost. And he didn't just say this, he concretized it. He says, for Kyoto, for example, back then, Kyoto was the big thing with climate change. So he said, how much would it cost to implement the Kyoto Protocol? This was the big plan to reduce emissions. This would cost $150 billion with a B, $billion a year. And what would it be? The effectiveness? We would postpone global warming by 6 years by the end of the century. And he concretized it even more. He says, to understand what this means, what does it mean we will postpone climate change for 6 years? It means that the guy in Bangladesh who would flood in the year 2100 will flood in the year 2106, which is not bad. I mean, 6 years could give them some time to do something, but he said it comes at a huge, huge, huge cost. Put into perspective, the amount of money that we have to put on climate change to postpone it for 6 years is 3 times the amount of money we give every year to the third world in humanitarian aid. And for what? To postpone it just for 6 years. This hit me like it was like I was hit by a truck. I couldn't believe what I heard. I was in evasion. So I remember we asked the professor, well, can this be true? Is this true? He said, listen, there's more in the video. So then Bjorn Lomborg says, but that's only one aspect of what you don't get about climate change. You don't get how expensive it would be to do something and how ineffective it would be to do something. But there's a second element, and that second element hit me even harder. He says, you're thinking about people 100 years from now, when we will see the effects of climate change in 2100. You think of that guy in Bangladesh as the average Bangladesian is today. But you don't take into consideration that in 100 years, even with the most pessimistic scenarios, the guy in Bangladesh will be as rich as Dutch, as someone in Netherlands is today, and probably even richer. So I was like, wow, I've never thought about this. That we worry about the year 2100 and not realizing that if things continue as they are today, these guys are going to be significantly richer. So we'd be spending tons of money to spend a relatively rich Dutch guy 100 years from now, says Lomborg, whereas today in Bangladesh, there are so many poor people who are suffering today, and we could help them today. Now I understand the objectivists will be like, oh, this is altruism. Just follow here. Okay, this is Lomborg is addressing like California liberals, American liberals, and the class was to environmentally. So I know you don't agree with this idea, who should we help more, maybe, but follow here. So, and actually he says, and this is what stuck with me. He says, imagine in 100 years, what will the rich Bangladeshi guy say? He would say, how odd that they cared so much about helping me today, the guy in 2100, and not my grandfather, who needed it so much more, and who didn't really care about climate change, had way more important things that had to do with his survival. This really, really hit me. So what when would be the good problems to solve first? So then Bjorn Lomborg goes and talks about malaria, and he can say we can easily prevent 500,000 people dying and 1 million cases of malaria every year. We can solve this at a relatively low cost. So the humanitarian in me starts thinking, wait a minute, could it be then that if I'm a good person, as I tell myself, maybe climate change is not the biggest thing we should focus right now? And again, this was huge for me. This was a huge blow to my reality. This was to my universe of meaning. And actually, he says the other very useful projects would be liberalization of trade, because it gives massive benefits at a small cost. I didn't even want to hear about that. But also tackling malnutrition and also tackling HIV, not via treatment, but via prevention. And at the end of the video, he says, by the way, these also happen to be the priorities of developing countries themselves. So there, I was dumbstruck. I was like, wow. Of course, a mind doesn't change so fast. So the first thing I did after I saw that video, which again was shock, I went on the internet and I tried to find any proof that this guy is a hired gun by big business. So I Googled something like, I don't know, my loser mind, like Bjorn Lomborg neoliberalism, or Bjorn Lomborg paid by big business. And of course, there were many results. And then I was like, okay, I'll forget about that. This guy is probably not telling the truth. But this video stuck me. And throughout the years, then I started teaching. I was a teaching assistant in environmental classes, in environmental social sciences. And I always showed that video to my students because I remember the effectiveness it had towards me. And through time, when I started shifting my politics and my ideas, Bjorn Lomborg was, let's say, my bridge to where I am now in the way of how I think about environmentalism. And of course, we know Alex Epstein has done excellent work, but for me, the beginning of the journey was Bjorn Lomborg. So why was this video so successful? What did he do there? Because that's the important thing. He reframed the topic. He reframed the question. Actually, he changed the question. So the question is not, which is the biggest problem? No, the question is, for which of these problems can we actually do something? We can do something at a reasonable cost, and we can do something that will have a reasonable result. So this reframing that he did was what really made that video very successful. Another way to put it, he met me where I was. He met me where my values were. And my values back then were, or at least that's what I told myself, how can we help poor people? How can we help the disadvantaged? Now, if you want to find out more about how we do this reframing of a topic or how we bridge our context, I encourage you to check out a video by Don Watkins, by our friend Don, on his YouTube channel. So put Don Watkins, Persuasion Mastery, Lesson 3, or go to his channel. There's a playlist, Persuasion Mastery. Lesson number 3 is called Context and Framing. And there you can see more about what he did. Thank you very much, Marilyn, for your contribution. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's now talk about the 2 other videos that really changed the way I view things. It's going to be a shorter reference, but again, very important lessons. The second video is the video I pencil. I, like I, me, pencil, like not pen, pencil. And this is an essay by Lawrence Reed by Leonard Reed, and it was transformed to a short film, an animated film. So if you put I pencil Leonard Reed, you will see you will see it. It's the story of the pencil. Actually, I have a pencil here. And this is a story that also Milton Friedman used. And it says how this very simple thing, the pencil, is the result of a process which is unimaginably complex. So this is basically a video about spontaneous order, about the market, the invisible hand of the market, putting people from different sides together and creating something which seems simple, but it's actually very, 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 very complex. Now, again, the ideological police officer here would say, you know what, the spontaneous order is not a proper theory because it doesn't take into accordance the role of the entrepreneur. I agree with all this. But again, I was someone who was a recovering leftist, still with one leg on Marxism. And here I see an animated video of 5 minutes about the brilliant process, the beautiful process of cooperation through the market. So till then, in my mind, market is college students. Back in the day, not in the Ayn Rand University. So students who, for their whole life, they have heard that market is something horrible. They see this video and they're like, I can see it in their eyes. Of course, very quickly they forget it because in 1 hour, in one semester, you cannot undo the damage done in years and years and years of education. So iPencil is the second video. What is brilliant about that video? Why does this video work? And why does the story of the pencil work? And again, this is why Friedman used all this story so much. Because it concretizes. It concretizes. It's one thing to tell you, market is about cooperation. That's too abstract. But when you bring the pencil and you tell the story of the pencil, this becomes concretized. And I follow a guy who I think he's called Ben Ewing, his newsletter. He also has appeared in John Watkins' podcast. Everything good I know about communication, basically, somehow it's related to John. So, and he talks about the power of one. What does the power of one mean? That he puts it like throw the spotlight on one specific case study, on one specific individual. And the example he is using is the story of Sandy Meadows. Sandy Meadows was a woman, and she had a very tragic story. So she was a widow, and her passion were flowers. And she was making like beautiful flower collections and stuff, bouquets. But turns out that because of regulations, in order to be able to work in a flower shop in that particular state, you needed a particular permit. And she didn't have this. So she lost her job and she ended up dying alone and sad and poor. I probably butchered the story, but you hear that story and it's like, wow, regulations are so unfair. Now, it's one thing to give you a lecture about regulations are unfair because they block the access to the market, whatever. But if I give you this story of this one particular woman, her tragic story and how regulations had to do with this, then suddenly the fact that regulations are evil, it makes sense. It clicks. So what's the meta lesson here? The meta lesson is the power of one. And the third story, the third video, I agree, Jonathan. Jonathan says, iPencil is cool, but it's non-ideological. I agree. But again, I first watched that video 2013. I was still a Marxist. So remember, what matters is also the context. So maybe to the person who I was back then, this was the gateway that I needed to find myself where I am today. I'm not sure, by the way, though, like I wouldn't tell you compromise your ideas and give an effective story, because how is it effective if you compromise something? But I think this story makes a good point, and the ideological side with which we don't agree is not the main thing in this story. Marilyn asks, and thank you very much, Jonathan and Marilyn, for your contribution. Why do so many people so often think more government is the solution to everything? Probably because we don't do a good job, because they haven't come across to ideas like the ones I'm discussing in an effective way as effective as the one I'm discussing. I thought that government is the solution to everything. Why? Because I never heard any alternative. So this is why this is important to understand. We understand how we make this message. So we change the frame, we frame it in a way that we provide a particular insight in the problem, but also we understand where the other person is coming from, and we concretize the power of one. Now, the third video that I want to discuss very quickly is a video by the late, great Hans Rosling, and that the statistician. And that video is called Hans Rosling, 200 countries, 200 years, 4 minutes. If you put BBC Hans Rosling, but also our producer has put the videos in the description. So Hans Rosling there does in real time and real space, there's a brilliant 3D projection. He shows the progress of the last 200 years with real life statistics. So there's one axis, which is time, and the other axis is how long people live and how much money people have. And he has various countries, bubbles, and China, India, the West, from everywhere. And it shows how, with the passage of time, these countries move from poor and people dying young to richer and people dying older. And you know what's the brilliant thing? You see that also the poorer countries, that their trajectory is upwards. So it's one thing, and this is a video of 4 minutes, no more than 4 minutes. So it's one thing to tell you, capitalism brings progress. And it's another way to show you that in 200 years, look the project, look it in front of you, look it in front of your eyes. This video is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. This was the video I would always show in my first class in Sociology 101, first class, first semester. Like, this is the one thing you need to understand about the world. This is the one thing you need to understand before we discuss everything else. That we were poor and life was short, and now we are rich and life is better. If you want to be sociologists, you have to ask yourself, how did this happen? This is the big news. And Hans Rosling, by showing you, again, in a way it's not concretizing visually, by showing you how all these countries, again, not only the rich countries, all the countries have the trajectory, living longer and healthier lives. This was very, very, very powerful. So to be 100% honest with you, I don't really remember where I was in my journey when I saw this video, but I used it because, again, I've seen how it had a huge impact on my students, on my sociology students. So this shows the video work. So it's one thing to say capitalism brings progress. It's another thing to dramatize it. So the lesson here is dramatize. Dramatize with a story or dramatize with visuals. There are many ways. But the main thing here is, again, let's try to find the most effective way to pass our message. And there's always a better way. There's always a more effective way. So this is the second time we do such a video. We discussed Konstantin Kissin's viral talk at Oxford Union. So it looks like we have now 2 episodes where we discuss effective communication, and there's always the same principle. Give example, concretize, dramatize. Remember what Konstantin Kissin did. It's one thing to say Russians are poor. It's another thing to say to go to the toilet, they dig the ground and they basically poo on the ground. So again, the dramatization, the concretization. So this is what I wanted to discuss with you today. And again, the links for the videos are on the description. Actually, something we could do, I haven't asked Razi, I don't think he would disagree though. If anyone wants to sponsor a video where we do like a breakdown of a particular good talk or a particular interesting speech or a particular story, something that entails effective communication, we can actually do it, even if it's from films. Like, it would be fun to do Gordon Gekko's speech or the speech by Danny DeVito in Other People's Money. Anyway, that's enough for today. We keep it short and neat. I'll see many of you these days in Athens for Ayn Rand Con Europe, the conference. I know the ARCUK team is going to be there. So Either I'll see you in real life or I'll see you in the daily objective next week. Thank you very much and all the best. Bye-bye.